Hi, everyone. Thank you for being a part of this event today. My name is Chrissy Testison, and I've been a part of Sea Dragon Search since it started back in 2020 and a little bit before that. I was lucky enough to do my master's helping to launch the project, and then that turned into a PhD, and I got to do my PhD using data collected by this amazing project. So yes, I wish I could be there with you in person today. I'm in California, unfortunately, not in a place with sea dragons right now. But even though I'm not in Australia at the moment, I did just want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where all of Sea Dragon Search's work has taken place and is continuing to take place across the coast of southern Australia, and pay respects to elders past and present. And again, thank you for being here and being interested in sea dragons and their conservation and marine habitats in general and our project. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the species and also what sea dragon search is. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so the reason that we're all here today, sea dragons, they're absolutely amazing fishes, the best in my opinion. And the study species that sea dragon search is mainly focused on are common or weedy and leafy sea dragons. In Victoria, you're going to be more familiar if you're a diver, a snorkeler, a free diver, going to be more familiar with the common or weedy sea dragon. Leafy sea dragons, as we'll see in a moment, sometimes occur in the very edge of Victoria near South Australia, but mostly we're going to have Wheaties at sites around Vic. So sea dragons are part of the family of cygnathids that also include seahorses and pipefishes, and you can see some of those similarities in their elongated snouts. But sea dragons, however, are even cooler, I think, than sea horses and pipefishes. They are only found in Australia. The only place in the world that you can see either of these species is along the southern coast of Australia. And they are the state marine emblems for Victoria. That's the common sea dragon, and South Australia for the leafy sea dragon. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there is a third species of sea dragon that is only recently discovered as of 2015. And this species is the ruby sea dragon. It is the sister species to the common sea dragon. And as far as we know right now, this species only occurs off of Australia's southwestern coast. It's only known from live records from a remotely operated camera. From a location in the southern part of Western Australia. And then there have also been some beach washed samples in other areas closer to Perth. But this species seems to occur pretty deep compared to the other ones. While common and leafy sea dragons can be found in just a few meters of water, anywhere up to as deep as several dozen meters, ruby sea dragons have only been seen alive deeper than 50 meters, which is beyond recreational scuba diving limits. Hence, Sea Dragon Search is not as focused at this time on collecting citizen science records of this species, but it is really cool. Nerida Wilson, who you might have a chance to ask questions of today, I'm not sure. But if you do, she is one of the people who discovered and described the ruby sea dragon. So she's an amazing resource if you're interested to learn more about this really cool sea dragon. Um, Moving forward and thinking about where exactly in Australia each of these three species can be found, the most widespread one, which is suggested by the name, is the common sea dragon or weedy sea dragon. And that species occurs from New South Wales, north of Sydney, all the way around to north of Perth in Western Australia, including Tasmania. The leafy sea dragon has a more limited distribution compared to that, and is known from just the edge between South Australia and Victoria, also around to north of Perth. When we do see records of the leafy sea dragon from that western part of Victoria or from the Perth area, those are usually more like one-offs. Most of the established populations that we know of this species are in South Australia and in the southern part of Western Australia. And then shrinking that distribution even more is what we know currently of the ruby sea dragon, which, as I just mentioned, is only known at this time from Western Australia. And again, Sea Dragon Search is really focused at this time on collecting records of common or weedy and leafy sea dragons, because those can often be captured by divers and snorkelers who are just out recreationally enjoying the ocean, maybe have an underwater camera and are snapping some photos of beautiful creatures that they see, such as sea dragons. And our project is for people who want to do a little bit more with their photos and have them contribute to something, a larger cause. I'll talk more about that in a minute. With this slide, I just want to focus on emphasizing that common and leafy sea dragons are both really, really amazing flagships for marine conservation. As I mentioned before, the weedy sea dragon is Victoria's official marine emblem, and the leafy sea dragon fills the same role in South Australia. They're also really admired and sought after in aquariums all over the world. You can imagine people who have never seen these animals before don't even know what to think of them or how to categorize them in their minds. Is it a fish? Is it a plant? What is it? It's beautiful. That's all people can really think when they first see them. So they're very captivating and so special because they only occur in Australia. So we really want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to look after them. And in terms of conservation, the first broadest sort of layer that is protecting these animals is the Australian Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. A bit of a mouthful, but that one protects all syngnathed fishes. In Australian waters, which includes sea dragons, from being taken or harassed, things like that. In some places, it is possible to go through a permitting process to be able to collect for aquaria. But again, there is a process for that. It's illegal to just go out and touch or take or interfere with a sea dragon in any way. It's a good thing to keep in mind as divers and snorkelers, even if you're trying to help, it is actually illegal to interfere with a sea dragon. We'll talk more about that. We have a code of conduct for diving with sea dragons. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But that's a first sort of broad bird's eye view layer of protection of sea dragons. Within each state that they occur, these species are also protected by state legislation, again, from being taken or harassed. And in some places where they occur, their habitats where they live happen to overlap with existing marine protected areas that have varying levels of protection. Some are no take, some, as some of you may be familiar with, there are different levels of protection depending on what kind of protected area it is. So there is some overlap there, but there's actually no species-specific legislation for sea dragons. Some states do have endangered species lists where they will have a list of animals that are considered threatened in their state, and there may be specific action plans or funding that are related to those. There's nothing like that for sea dragons at this time. So their main protection comes from not being able to be taken or harassed, but there's not necessarily a plan for what they need specifically as a species. Um, A really important conservation tool globally is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List. And that's a really important tool for raising awareness. In some places, for example, in South Australia, the state legislation and which animals they put on those endangered state lists uh, is sort of directly based on what the Red List says about that species. The Red List is important for many, many reasons. And so we're really invested in making sure that sea dragons are accurately categorized on the Red List. Sea Dragon Search did a reassessment of the common sea dragon last year. We did it in 2024. I think it was published in 2025. And that animal was recategorized from least concern, which had been its previous status, to vulnerable with some new information, a lot of which came from Sea Dragon Search data contributed by citizen scientists. We were able to get a better picture of that species conservation status and recategorize them. The leafy sea dragon is currently still sitting at least concern, but there is a reassessment underway for that species. And the ruby sea dragon is currently data deficient, although there will likely be a reassessment coming for that species as well, even though there's not a lot of new data for it, but we're continuing to try. So let's talk more about Sea Dragon Search specifically. This project came into existence because a lot of those conservation assessments have been, that least concern status. It's not necessarily that nobody's concerned about these species. It's that there isn't enough data to actually prove that they would qualify for a more threatened listing. So they kind of default to data deficient or least concern in those cases. And sea dragons have traditionally been challenging to study. They're really well camouflaged. It's expensive and time consuming and takes a lot of resources for scientists to get out and do field work. And sea dragons occur across, even though they're only found in Australia, they're found across a pretty large area when you consider the entire south coast from New South Wales to Western Australia, including Tasmania. So this project was born out of an idea of trying to think of a way to collect data over the long term and across their range, and how to do that in a sustainable way and in a way that could inform new research that could then inform conservation planning. So with Sea Dragon Search, we ask anyone who has photographs of sea dragons. It doesn't matter if you took them yesterday or if you took them 15 years ago. It doesn't matter if you have one photo or 1,000 photos. It doesn't matter if it's an amazing photo that won a contest or if it's a blurry photo that you just barely managed to get while you were trying to keep your buoyancy. All the photos. We want all the photos for this project. And the way that we ask people to share them is we have a website with a pretty simple reporting form. You just need to know the date when your photos were taken and the location, the general location. We don't need GPS coordinates. It's just if you were at Flinders, Flinders. If you were at Portsea, Portsea. That's what we need in terms of location. And then I'll show you in the coming slides what we do with those photos. We use an AI pipeline to assist us in matching photos of individuals. And I'll tell you more about how we do that. And then in that way, we're able to build out stories of the lives of individual sea dragons. And those time series can help us to answer all kinds of really important and interesting questions about them. So, the way that we identify individual sea dragons from images is because sea dragons have unique patterning that is stable by the time they reach adulthood, sometimes a little bit sooner. They have these spot and on leafy sea dragons bar patterns that are like a fingerprint. It's unique to the individual and it's stable over time. And because of those things, we are able to use that patterning to to look at a photograph and decide whether or not two photographs are of the same sea dragon. And that way we can categorize them under different individual identification numbers to build out lists of photos and time series of different individuals. This is something that has been done with many other species, both terrestrial and marine. In the ocean, it's been done with whale sharks, manta rays, giant sea bass. On land, it's been done with uh, big cats, zebras, but basically anything that you can think of that has a unique scar pattern or a unique spot pattern or something that you can use to identify it in that way that's stable over time. And there is a nonprofit, Wild Me, who has developed software to help to match these photos to one another, because you can imagine that as you get more and more photos, it just becomes an impossibly time-consuming process to go through and check all of these different photos to see when you get a new photo where it belongs or what it matches to. So Sea Dragon Search partnered with Wild Me to develop these tools for common and leafy sea dragons. We didn't know when we started if it would work, but it did wonderfully work out for both species. It works really, really well, actually. And so what happens is when somebody submits their photos through that reporting form that I was mentioning, they go into the Sea Dragon Search database, and the AI pipeline is going to examine the photos and the query photo, and then scan the database to see if there are other photos under other individual identifiers that it thinks match with that query image. Then it's going to return a list of the matches that it thinks are the most likely ones for that query image. And this is what Nerida and I see on the back end when we go in to process the encounters that have been submitted by citizen scientists. We see this list of suggested matches. And so this is where an actual human takes over, is in the decision-making part. And the two of us will inspect, we'll look at the patterning, we'll look at appendage sizes and shapes, we'll look at scarring, we'll look at anything that's distinguishing and stable to be able to confidently make a decision about whether any of those matches are indeed a correct match. If we are not able to find a correct match, we will assign a new ID to the query individual, and that will start a new time series for a new dragon in the database. So again, these are some of the things that we look for. Just to, on those previous slides, you might have seen like some yellow coloring on the snout. That's just a highlight that comes from the AI does that to sort of show us where it's picking up on similarity. That's not actually part of the sea dragons. So these photos are without that yellow highlight, so you can kind of see the difference. And so we're looking for these different things to determine whether there's a match or not. And then once we assign the individual either to an existing time series or to a new ID in the database, whoever submitted those photos is going to get an automated email letting them know how the animal was categorized. Either you discovered a new sea dragon that we don't already have in the database, yay for you, or you added to an existing time series that we have and you're helping us to continue to monitor this individual, yay for that as well. Either way, so exciting. Because either we are building our knowledge of an individual or we're building our knowledge of a population or both. And at the same time as the person who submitted those images will get those notifications. If there's any, so if it's an individual that we already know about, that we already have photos of in the database, anyone else who has submitted a photo of that individual will get a notification that it has been cited again. So you will get notifications about your own photos, but also if somebody else cites a dragon that you also cited, you'll be kept up to date on that dragon's timeline. Basically, you are a part of that dragon's life now, and you will be updated when we know something new about it. I thought you all might be interested to just get a little overview of where we're at in Victoria. The participation in Victoria has been amazing. We do monthly leaderboards every month on our social media. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But basically, it's like the people who have contributed the most photos for the previous month or done the most submissions. And we almost always have people from Victoria up there. We have over 5,000 encounters and nearly 2,000 individuals documented. The difference between those two is that an encounter, for each one individual, there could be many encounters from different dates. An encounter is just like one submission from one dive from one date. And then the individual refers to all of the encounters for that specific sea dragon. Um, in Victoria, we have a number of individuals who have been sighted over a span of 6 years and or over a span of 7 years. The longest sighted one is in the 7 year range. And in terms of reproduction, we usually start seeing brooding sea dragons in Victoria around September or October. September is kind of the earliest records that we have, and October is a little bit more of the average. And then the latest broods we see from Victoria are generally in January and February. I wanted to share some visuals from two of the most popular dive sites that we get submissions from. You probably, if you're a diver or a snorkeler, have heard of these places. Flinders Pier and Portsea Pier, both on the Mornington Peninsula. And these discovery curves are basically showing over time how well we sort of know that population based on the numbers of encounters that have been submitted and the numbers of individuals that have been identified. So on the horizontal axis, it's showing the number of encounters, and on the vertical axis, it's showing the every time a new individual is discovered. So it's sort of showing that over time, the more encounters we have, the fewer new individuals we see. However, in other locations that have smaller populations, these curves will start to flatten out more over time. As we get more encounters, it'll tend to be that we have identified most of the individuals, so we won't often be seeing new ones. But in Victoria, what we've kind of discovered is that at least at these two locations, the populations tend to be really large, hundreds of individuals in these populations, actually. And so these ones haven't flattened off the way that some of the smaller populations do. And that's good news for Victoria because hopefully that means that these populations are doing relatively well. Although we do want to continue monitoring and keeping an eye on them because there are many threats emerging with the impacts of climate change. We'll talk more about that in a bit as well. But yeah, just to give you an idea of what your sea dragon populations kind of look like at this point. And then I wanted to share a couple of individual sea dragon stories as well. This is one of our longest sighted individuals, and he has been sighted over a time span of 7 years and 2.5 months. Um, Whoops, hold on. I made my screen go funky. Sorry, doing this on the fly. Um, so he's been sighted over a time span of over 7 years. And these are only 3 photos from his time series. We have many more than this, but it's really cool to be able to look at the photos and see the story of a sea dragon's life play out. We can see different times when this individual has had broods. We can see, when he was younger and sort of more shiny and new looking compared to as he gets older, and there's some damage to appendages. In other other locations where we have sea dragons with parasites, we can see things like when a parasite appears, how it moves along the body, when it drops off. If we have a sea dragon with an injury, we can see how that injury heals or doesn't heal. So just so many interesting things that can be observed with a time series like this. And one of the things I always love to see too is how many different citizen scientists contribute to our story of one sea dragon. It's really a group effort, and it's really cool to see how different people fill in the blanks to flesh out the overall picture. Um, so yeah, that's a fun example of one of our long-sighted sea dragons. And then I also wanted to share an example of a sea dragon. This one's nickname ended up being Wally. And Wally was hanging out at the Rye Pier for about 6 months, which was unusual because we barely had any encounters from there. And yeah, Wally is one of the only sea dragons that we've seen there. And again, various citizen scientists came together and contributed their photos to paint this picture of Wally's time at Rye. Um, and he disappeared. We don't know where he went. See, so as I kind of mentioned before, when you fill out the encounter form, you're giving a general location, you're not giving GPS coordinates, and we're not we don't have any way of tracking the sea dragons and their fine scale movements. So we don't know if he turned up in another place, we could identify him and say he went from Rye Pier to wherever else. But we haven't seen him again since this. So to me, Wally is just kind of a cool example of, even though we've gained so much amazing knowledge through this project already, sea dragons are still so mysterious, and there's so much that we have yet to learn and understand about them. And I think that's what's really motivating to keep going, and gives us sort of new goals and new visions for the project. Even as we answer some questions, 10 more questions come up. So Wally is kind of a cool symbol of that. And who knows, he may turn up again, either back at Rye or somewhere else at some point. So you submit those photos so that if you happen to capture Wally or one of the thousands of others who we're tracking, you can be a part of understanding how those stories are playing out. So speaking of that, how to participate in the project, we have a website. It's pretty straightforward address to remember, just seadragonsearch.org. And there are many places on the website where you can click a button to reach that reporting form and submit your images to the database, including a header bar at the top that should be on any page of the website that you click on. You just click there and that should take you through to the reporting form. Yes, make sure something that I should note here is make sure that if you want to be a part of the project and you want your photos to be used for research, you have to submit them through the submission form. There's a user agreement on there, and there's a box that you have to check to give consent. We don't use people's photos without getting consent and having them acknowledge the user agreement. So if you join our social media groups, which we definitely encourage you to do, but if you, for example, post photos to our Facebook group, we can't use them, and we won't use them, and they won't become a part of the database. So if you want to participate, do make sure that you come and submit them through the reporting form. Share them on Facebook and Instagram too, because that's fun and people like to see them, but do submit them directly to the project as well. And why should you do this? What sort of plans do we have coming up that you might want to be a part of? Well, even though we have recently reassessed the red list for the common sea dragon, we certainly do not have all of the data on this species and all of the understanding that we would love to have. There are still so many questions. I've been able to do abundance estimates for some populations, but there are still many others that need assessing. And they're even the ones that I've been able to assess so far, we want to keep monitoring them into the future. And we want to continue to make our database more and more robust so that it can support more and more robust outputs and research outcomes that can then form the basis for really evidence-based conservation for these species. In addition to sort of those very conservation slanted things like estimating population trends, there are still many more questions that we want to answer. For example, about lifespans. That's a really cool one that Nerida is going to lead in the future. So we just have many, many more things that we want to look into, and we can continue to use photos going forward. But also, again, as I mentioned earlier, for anyone who has a historical collection of photos, we want those as well. We want all of the photos possible because we want as much data as possible to have our understandings of what's going on be as accurate as possible. So another thing, yeah, that I think is important to mention is that, the impacts of climate change are continuing to really hit hard everywhere, but really along the southern coast of Australia, the east coast of Australia, and the southeast and the southwest are global climate change hotspots. Things are happening really fast and really intensively in those places. And so I think we've seen some situations already happen, like the harmful algal bloom that's been taking place in South Australia, where it's so important to have baseline data sets before catastrophic events happen so that we can really understand the extent and the impact of things as we go forward. We want to build those baseline data sets for sea dragons everywhere that they live. So that is that's a reason to submit photos from any time period. Again, historical photos, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago, yesterday, next week, whenever you happen to have them. They're all really, really important, and they do make a difference in filling out those individual timelines. As I also mentioned earlier, the whole goal of Sea Dragon Search is to get that long-term and range-wide perspective. And that's why we've tried to partner with the communities who care about these animals, because there's no way that scientists can do this without the communities and without the divers and the snorkelers and the people who are out there in the water with the dragons every weekend. Or even as often as you're able to. That really, when all of that insight and data is aggregated together, that's when we're able to get those larger perspectives that help us to really make informed management recommendations. And we hope that it also makes communities feel empowered, because a lot of times I think in this era of climate change, it's hard to feel like there's something you can do, because, we've got these massive corporations that, especially in America, it's so bad, just that you feel powerless against what can I do against these huge, huge, powerful interests that are working against the health of the planet. But so we hope that this is, something that feels like we are doing something, like we are taking the action that we can take. And along those lines, I'm really interested in that part of it, in the community and in other people who feel the motivation that we feel to try to do this sort of locally empowered, conservation oriented action. And so, as part of my PhD, I interviewed some of our citizen scientists who were really generous to give me the time and opportunity to do that. And I wrote a chapter about what motivates people in sea dragon search to participate in the project and to be a part of it, hoping that that can contribute to citizen science more broadly. So, just wanted to mention that I'm going to be submitting that for publication this year, along with some manuscripts on abundances and sea dragon reproduction. So those are some things that will be coming out this year, and we're going to just be continuing to try and put out as much research as we can in the coming years. We've committed to doing sea dragon search through at least 2030, and I don't know, we have a feeling it might end up being longer than that too. So we'll keep you posted. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this event today. I wanted to just show some photos to underscore why this is a really meaningful thing to do that you guys have done today. Marine debris and entanglement pose risks to many marine species, not just sea dragons. And it really does make a difference when a group of people gets out there and is committed to doing what they can to clean this up and give the life down there another cycle with a bit of a cleaner environment. And I'm sure we'll have to get back out there and do it again at some point. But this is a really important task that you guys have undertaken today. And again, I wish I could be there and be participating, but I do hope to be coming back to Australia and to be able to meet more of you in person when I do. Just for reference for future diving with sea dragons, and you can also find this on the Sea Dragon Search website. We always want to take the opportunity to remind people to be really aware when they are diving in any habitat in the ocean and with any animals. But sea dragons are pretty limited swimmers. They cannot move out of the way quickly like other fish that you see who sort of dart about. So really pay attention when you're diving with sea dragons to your buoyancy and to where your fins are moving. When you're approaching sea dragons, since they can't swim away quickly, just try to be aware of if they seem to be stressed out. They will usually try to move away from you if they are stressed out. They just won't be able to do it quickly. So just try to be sensitive to the cues that they're giving. Rising in the water column, that's not a good sign. You don't want to be pushing them to do that. And if there's a lot of people around, just be also aware of the impacts of large groups and lots of cameras and try to minimize the overall impact to the sea dragons in the vicinity. And remember that even if you're trying to help, do not ever touch them or interfere with them. And if you're using video lights, if you're on a night dive or even if you're using video lights during the day, just again, try to be cautious and minimal, knowing that sea dragons their vision is really important for them. They're visual predators. So just, be considerate when you are doing things like that. Okay, and back to social media. Sea Dragon Search is on Facebook and Instagram, and the communities on both platforms have grown a lot in the past few years, and we're really excited about that. And we love bringing more people into these communities. We post research updates on social media. We have contests and fun things from time to time that this is gonna be the channel where we distribute that kind of information. Narita is really great about posting little insights from the database. So, for example, if an individual who hasn't been seen in a long time is suddenly spotted, she'll update the community on things like that. We have the monthly leaderboards that I mentioned, announcements, events like this are going to be announced through socials. So, that's just what we post. The really fun part is actually what the rest of the community posts when other citizen scientists and contributors will share photos and stories and dive conditions and things like that. Just remember that if you post your sea dragon photos on Facebook or Instagram, that is not going towards research. You have to submit them through the submission form, through the database. So please do that, but also join us for fun and discussion on social media. I just want to thank all of our participating institutions. There are a lot of people who have gotten involved with Seadragon Search and helped to spread the word. So we're very grateful for all of those people and places. And with that, I think we're going to have an opportunity for questions. Thank you everyone so much for being interested and listening to this talk. And I hope that next time I can be there in person and get to meet new faces and say hello to people I haven't seen in a while. And in the meantime, have a really great day. Bye.